My stepsister stole the essay I wrote and submitted it to colleges as her own. I watched her lose every acceptance she had. My stepsister Kelsey moved into our house when I was 14. Her mother Diane married my father 2 years after my mom died from cancer. I was still grieving, and suddenly I had to share my room with a girl who acted like she owned the place from day one. Kelsey was the same age as me, but that was where our similarities ended. She was loud and popular and always needed to be the center of attention. I was quiet and kept to myself and spent most of my time reading or writing in my journal. Kelsey thought I was boring. She told me that constantly. She said I needed to lighten up. She said I needed to stop being so depressing all the time. She said my dead mother would not want me moping around forever. I learned to stay out of her way. Senior year came and we both started working on college applications. I wanted to go to Weston University more than anything. It was a small liberal arts school 4 hours away with an excellent creative writing program. My mother went there before she got sick. She used to tell me stories about her time on campus and how it changed her life. She always said she hoped I would go there someday. I wrote my application essay about her. I wrote about watching her get sicker and weaker over 2 years. I wrote about sitting beside her hospital bed reading her favorite books out loud because she could not hold them anymore. I wrote about the day she died and how I promised her I would live a life that made her proud. I wrote about how Weston was her dream for me and how going there would be my way of keeping her close. It was the most personal thing I had ever written. I spent 3 months on it. I revised it over and over until every word felt right. I saved it on my laptop and I printed one copy to show my English teacher, who said it was the best student essay she had ever read. She said any school would be lucky to have me. I submitted my application to Weston in early November. I also applied to 3 backup schools just in case. I felt good about my chances. My grades were strong and my essay was honest and powerful. I thought I did everything right. Kelsey submitted her applications around the same time. She applied to Weston too, even though she never mentioned wanting to go there before. She said her guidance counselor recommended it. She said it would be good to have options. I did not think much of it at the time. In February, I got an email from Weston's admissions office. They wanted to schedule a phone interview to discuss my application. I was excited because interviews usually meant they were seriously considering you. I prepared for a week. I practiced answering questions about my goals and my interests and my essay. The interview was on a Thursday afternoon. The admissions counselor was a woman named Mrs. Langford. She was polite at first, but something felt off from the beginning. She asked me basic questions about my grades and activities. Then she asked about my essay. She asked me to tell her more about my mother. I talked about my mom for 10 minutes. I told Mrs. Langford about her laugh and her cooking and her obsession with old movies. I told her about the books we read together and the trips we took and the way she always knew when I was sad. I told her things I had never told anyone because the essay opened a door I could not close. When I finished, Mrs. Langford was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me a strange question. She asked if I knew Kelsey Drummond. I said yes. I said she was my stepsister. Mrs. Langford said Kelsey also applied to Weston. She said Kelsey submitted an essay that was identical to mine. She said the only difference was the name at the top. I could not breathe. I asked her to repeat what she said. She repeated it. She said both essays described watching a mother die of cancer. She said both essays mentioned the same books and the same hospital room and the same promise. She said the admissions office was confused because they received 2 applications from the same address with the same essay. She asked if I could explain. I told her I wrote that essay myself. I told her it was about my real mother who really died. I told her Kelsey's mother was alive and well and living in our house. I told her Kelsey must have stolen my essay from my laptop and submitted it as her own. Mrs. Langford said she believed me. She asked if I could send her copies of my drafts and anything else that proved the essay was mine. I told her I had everything saved on my laptop. I told her I had months of revisions with different dates on each file. I told her my English teacher saw the final version in October and could write a statement about it. Mrs. Langford said that would be perfect. She said to send everything to her email address and she would review it all. She thanked me for being honest and said she would be in touch soon. The call ended and I sat there staring at my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The house was completely silent. Kelsey was at volleyball practice and would not be home for another hour. I looked around our bedroom and felt sick. Her bed was 3 feet from mine. Her clothes were mixed with mine in the closet. Her stuff was everywhere and I suddenly hated all of it. I stood up and walked to my desk. My laptop was right where I left it this morning. I opened it and pulled up the folder where I kept all my college application materials. The essay file was there with the original creation date from August. I clicked through the revision history and counted 14 different versions. Each one had a different save date. August 23rd, September 5th, September 19th, October 2nd, October 11th. The dates told the whole story of how I worked on it for months. I took screenshots of everything. Then I called Summer. She answered on the second ring and I started crying before I could say hello. She asked what was wrong and I tried to explain, but the words came out all jumbled. I told her about the phone call from Weston. I told her about Kelsey stealing my essay. I told her that Mrs. Langford needed proof, and I needed her help. Summer did not hesitate for even a second. She said she remembered my essay perfectly. She said it was the most powerful thing she had read from a student in her entire career. She said she would write a statement right now confirming that I showed her the complete draft in October. She said Kelsey did not even mention applying to Weston until late October, when the guidance counselors did a check-in about application deadlines. I thanked her about 5 times and she told me to stop thanking her. She told me to check my laptop for the file creation dates and make sure I had everything documented. We stayed on the phone for over an hour while I went through every single file. I took screenshots of the properties showing when each file was created and last modified. I found my old journal entries from when my mom was sick. I had written about reading to her in the hospital. I had written about the books we read together. I had written about the day she died. Those journal entries matched the details in my essay exactly because I used them as source material when I was writing. Summer told me to send her copies of those too, because they proved the essay came from my real life and my real grief. I was still on the phone with her when I heard Kelsey's car in the driveway. My whole body went cold. I told Summer I had to go and closed my laptop fast. I shoved it under my bed and sat down at my desk trying to look normal. Kelsey came bouncing into our room talking about how practice went. She was in a great mood. She asked what I wanted for dinner and if I had finished my calculus homework yet. She had no idea that everything was falling apart. She had no idea that Weston had called me. She had no idea that I knew what she did. I told her I was not hungry and turned back to my desk. She kept talking about some drama with her teammates, but I could not focus on anything she was saying. I just kept thinking about how she stole my mother's story. How she read about the worst time of my life and decided to use it for herself. How she was walking around acting normal while I knew the truth. That night I could not sleep. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling while Kelsey slept 3 feet away from me. Every time she moved or made a noise, I tensed up. I kept thinking about my mom. About how much she wanted me to go to Weston. About how I poured all my love for her into that essay. About how Kelsey took it and put her own name on it like it meant nothing. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to shake her awake and demand to know how she could do something so terrible. But I did not. I just lay there in the dark, waiting for morning. The next day I got to the school early. I went straight to the guidance office and asked to see Eamon Green. He was my counselor and had helped me with my college application since junior year. His secretary said he had a few minutes before his first appointment and let me into his office. I sat down across from his desk and told him everything. I watched his face change as I explained about the stolen essay and the phone call from Weston. He looked horrified. He said he could not believe Kelsey would do something like that. He pulled up both our files on his computer right away. He scrolled through Kelsey's application list and counted out loud. 5 schools total, Weston and 4 others. He asked if I wanted him to contact all 5 admissions offices. I said yes without even thinking about it. He nodded and started making notes. He said he would send official statements to each school explaining the situation and providing documentation that I was the original author. He said this was academic dishonesty of the worst kind, and Kelsey needed to face real consequences. I went home that afternoon and sent Mrs. Langford everything. The draft files with all their timestamps. Summer's statement on the school letterhead. My journal entries from 2 years ago that matched the essay details perfectly. I attached it all to an email and hit send. The evidence was right there in black and white. There was no way anyone could look at it and think Kelsey wrote that essay. 2 days later, Mrs. Langford called me again. She said Weston had officially flagged Kelsey's application for plagiarism. She said they were removing Kelsey from consideration for admission. Then she said something that made me start crying. She said my application was moved forward for full review. She said my essay was one of the most powerful pieces of writing their admissions team had read in years. She said it was clear that it came from a real place of grief and love. She said they were honored to consider me for admission to my mother's school. I hung up with Mrs. Langford and stared at my phone for a long time. My hands were shaking. I had evidence now. I had proof that the essay was mine. I had Summer's statement and my drafts and everything I needed to prove what Kelsey did. The next morning, I went to the school early and headed straight to the guidance office. I needed to see Eamon before classes started. His door was open and he was at his desk drinking coffee and looking at his computer. I knocked on the door frame and he looked up and smiled. I sat down across from him and told him everything. I told him about Mrs. Langford's call and the duplicate essays and how Weston believed me. I told him I had all the proof ready to send. His smile disappeared while I talked. He looked shocked and then angry. He pulled up his computer and started typing fast. He asked me which schools Kelsey applied to besides Weston. I counted them out. 5 schools total. He wrote them all down and said he was going to contact every single admissions office. He said this was serious academic dishonesty, and he needed to report it. He said the other schools deserved to know what happened before they made their decisions. I nodded and felt something loosen in my chest. Someone was finally taking this seriously. Someone was finally helping me. Eamon spent the rest of the morning making calls and sending emails. I went to class, but I could barely focus. I kept thinking about what was happening in the guidance office. I kept thinking about Kelsey's applications getting flagged at every school. At lunch, I sat with Haley in our usual spot by the windows. She could tell something was wrong right away. She asked what happened, and I told her everything. I told her about the stolen essay and the phone call and Eamon contacting the other schools. Haley's face went red. She slammed her hand on the table and said she could not believe Kelsey would do something so terrible. She said she wanted to come over and confront Kelsey with me. She said she would tell Kelsey exactly what she thought of her. I shook my head. I told Haley I appreciated it, but I was not ready yet. I still had to sleep in the same room as Kelsey every night. I still had to see her every morning. I could not handle a confrontation like that right now. Haley understood, but she was still mad. She said Kelsey deserved everything that was coming to her. The principal called me to her office that afternoon during last period. I walked down the empty hallway feeling nervous. The principal's office was at the end of the main hall with big windows looking out at the parking lot. I knocked and went inside. The principal was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and glasses. She asked me to sit down and close the door. She said Eamon had informed her about the situation with my college essay. She said she needed to ask me some questions and see my evidence. I showed her everything. I opened my laptop and pulled up all the draft files with their timestamps. I showed her the first version I wrote in September, and all the revisions I made through October. I showed her Summer's statement on the school letterhead confirming I showed her the completed essay in October. I showed her my application submission confirmation from early November. I walked her through the whole timeline. The principal took notes and asked careful questions. She wanted to know when Kelsey submitted her applications. She wanted to know if Kelsey had access to my laptop. I told her Kelsey and I shared a room. I told her my laptop was usually on my desk, and I did not lock it because I never thought I needed to. The principal nodded and said she understood. She said she would need to speak with Kelsey separately. She said she was calling both my father and Diane to come in for a meeting. She thanked me for being honest and told me I could go back to class. I walked out into the hallway and sat on the bench outside her office. I was supposed to go back to class, but I could not make myself move. A few minutes later, the principal's secretary walked past me and down the hall. She came back with Kelsey. Kelsey saw me sitting there and her face went pale. She looked scared. The secretary opened the principal's door and Kelsey went inside. The door closed behind her. I sat on that bench and waited. I could hear voices through the door, but I could not make out words at first. Then Kelsey's voice got louder. She was talking fast and her voice sounded high and panicked. I heard her say she did not know what I was talking about. I heard her say there must be some mistake. The principal's voice stayed calm and quiet. I could not hear what she was saying, but I could hear Kelsey getting more upset. Kelsey started almost yelling. She said I was lying. She said I was trying to ruin her life. She said the principal needed to look at the evidence again because there was no way it proved anything. I sat there listening to my stepsister fall apart. I felt strange. I did not feel happy or satisfied. I just felt tired. The meeting went on for 20 minutes. When Kelsey finally came out, her eyes were red and her makeup was smeared. She walked right past me without looking at me. She did not say anything. She just walked fast down the hallway and disappeared around the corner. The principal came to her door and asked me to come back inside. She told me she was requiring my father and Diane to come in for a family meeting. She said they needed to understand what happened and what the consequences would be. She said the meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. That night at dinner was awful. My father made pasta and we all sat around the table like normal. Except nothing was normal. Kelsey glared at me from across the table. Her eyes were still red and puffy. Diane kept asking what was going on. She said the school called and told her to come in for a meeting but would not say why. She looked at Kelsey and then at me. My father asked if everything was okay. He said the principal sounded serious on the phone. I cut my pasta into smaller and smaller pieces. I did not eat any of it. I just moved it around my plate. Kelsey stared at me and I could feel her anger like heat across the table. Diane asked again what was happening. She said someone needed to tell her what was going on. I stayed quiet. I wanted them to hear it from the principal. I wanted them to hear all the evidence laid out in an official meeting where they could not make excuses or pretend it was not serious. My father tried to make conversation about his day at work, but nobody was listening. Diane kept pushing. She asked Kelsey directly if she was in trouble. Kelsey said she did not want to talk about it. She said I was making things up. She said the principal was believing lies. I looked up at her and our eyes met across the table. She looked away first. After dinner, I went to our room and locked myself in the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub and tried to breathe normally. Tomorrow, my father and Diane would hear everything. Tomorrow, they would have to face what Kelsey did. I did not know how they would react. I did not know if they would believe the evidence or if Diane would find some way to defend her daughter. The next day felt endless. I could barely pay attention in any of my classes. At 2:30, my father picked me up from the school. Diane was already in the car. Nobody talked on the drive to the principal's office. We walked into the building together and the secretary showed us to the conference room. The principal was already there with a folder of papers spread out on the table. Eamon was there too. We all sat down. The principal thanked everyone for coming. She said she needed to discuss a serious academic integrity issue. She opened the folder and started laying out the evidence. She showed my father and Diane the 2 college essays. She showed them the timestamps on my files. She showed them Summer's statement. She showed them Eamon's records of when each of us submitted our applications. She explained that Kelsey had submitted my essay word for word to 5 different colleges. She explained that 3 of those schools had already sent acceptance letters to Kelsey before Eamon contacted them about the plagiarism. My father looked shocked. His face went white and he stared at the papers on the table. Diane immediately started making excuses. She said there must be a misunderstanding. She said maybe Kelsey did not realize what she was doing. She said maybe Kelsey thought it was okay to use the essay since we were family now. The principal said the evidence was clear. She said there was no misunderstanding. She said Kelsey copied my entire essay and put her own name on it. I finally spoke up. My voice came out shaky, but I kept going. I told them exactly what happened. I told them I spent 3 months writing that essay about my mother. I told them I poured my grief and my love into every word. I told them Kelsey must have copied it from my laptop while I was at the school. I told them she submitted my mother's story as her own to steal the future my mother wanted for me. I told them she took the most personal thing I ever wrote and used it like it meant nothing. My voice was shaking, but I did not cry. Kelsey broke down. She started sobbing and saying she was sorry. She said she was desperate. She said her own essay was not good enough, and she knew mine was beautiful. She said she thought since we lived in the same house, it would not matter because we were family now. She said she did not think anyone would find out. Diane tried to minimize it. She said the essay was about a shared family tragedy since she was married to my father now. She said we were all one family, and maybe that meant the story belonged to all of us. I lost my temper. I shouted that Diane was not my mother. I shouted that Kelsey never knew my mother. I shouted that they had no right to claim any part of that story. I said my mother died and it was the worst thing that ever happened to me and Kelsey stole it. My father finally spoke up. But he only said we needed to calm down. He said we needed to figure out how to fix this as a family. I stared at him. I told him there was nothing to fix. I told him Kelsey committed plagiarism and she needed to face the consequences. I told him I was not going to pretend this did not happen just to keep the peace. I stood up and walked out of the meeting. I went straight to Haley's house because I could not go home yet. She opened the door and took one look at my face and pulled me inside. Her parents were in the kitchen making dinner and they did not ask questions when Haley said I was staying for a while. We went up to her room and I told her everything that happened at the meeting. She sat on her bed and listened while I paced back and forth. When I finished, she said Kelsey deserved whatever was coming and I needed to stop feeling guilty about it. I stayed at Haley's house until almost 10 that night. When I finally got home, everyone was already in their rooms. I brushed my teeth and changed into pajamas and climbed into my bed. Kelsey was lying in her bed across the room staring at the ceiling. The room was dark except for the streetlight coming through the window. She said my name quietly. I did not answer. She said it again. I told her I was tired and wanted to sleep. She started crying. She said she was sorry and she would tell all the schools the truth. She said she would confess to everything and fix this. I turned over to face the wall. I told her she was only sorry because she got caught. I told her if Mrs. Langford had not called me, she would have kept the acceptances and gone to college on my mother's story without ever feeling bad about it. She cried harder and said that was not true. She said she felt terrible the whole time. I asked her why she did it then. She did not have an answer. I told her I did not forgive her, and I did not want to talk about it anymore. She cried herself to sleep, and I lay awake listening to her breathing and wondering how I was supposed to share a room with her for the rest of the school year. The next morning, Eamon called me into his office before first period. He had printed out copies of all my evidence and organized it into folders. He said he was going to contact the 3 schools that already accepted Kelsey and explain what happened. He asked if I was sure I wanted to move forward with this. I said yes without hesitating. He nodded and said he would start making calls that afternoon. Over the next week, those 3 schools received detailed reports from Eamon. He sent them my original essay with all the timestamps. He sent them Summer's statement. He sent them the timeline showing I submitted my applications weeks before Kelsey submitted hers. Each school responded by opening their own investigation. They sent emails to Kelsey asking for her original essay drafts and any documentation she had. They wanted to see revision history and notes and anything that proved she wrote the essay herself. Kelsey could not provide any of it because the essay was not hers. She tried to claim she deleted all her drafts to save space on her computer. The schools pointed out that I had months of documented revisions while she had nothing. They asked her to explain how she wrote an essay identical to mine down to specific details about books and hospital rooms. She had no explanation. One of the schools called her in for a phone interview, and she broke down crying and admitted she took my essay. She said she panicked because her own essay was not good enough. She said she did not think anyone would find out. The first acceptance got rescinded 3 days later. It was from a state university about 2 hours away. Kelsey got an email saying her acceptance was withdrawn due to academic integrity violations. The email said she was banned from reapplying for 2 years because plagiarism was taken seriously at their institution. She was at the school when she got the email. She came home that afternoon and went straight to our room and slammed the door. I heard her crying through the wall while I did homework in the kitchen. Diane came home from work an hour later and Kelsey told her what happened. Diane came downstairs and found me sitting at the table. She started screaming that I was ruining Kelsey's life over a stupid essay. She said my mother would be ashamed of me for being so vindictive and cruel. She said I was destroying Kelsey's future because I could not let go of the past. My father came out of his office and told Diane to stop. But he did not actually defend me. He just said we all needed to calm down and talk about this rationally. I stood up and walked out of the house. I went back to Haley's house and asked if I could stay for a while. Her parents said yes immediately. They gave me their guest room and told me to stay as long as I needed. Haley's mom helped me pack a bag with clothes and school supplies. I moved in that night and did not tell my father or Diane where I was going. I just texted my father that I was safe and staying with a friend. Summer found me at lunch the next day and asked how I was doing. I told her I moved out because I could not stay in that room with Kelsey anymore. She said she understood and told me I was doing the right thing. She checked in with me every day after that. She made sure I was eating lunch and keeping up with my assignments. She told me I was standing up for myself and honoring my mother's memory by not letting Kelsey get away with stealing her story. On Thursday, the second acceptance got rescinded. It was from a private college in another state. Their letter was harsh. It said plagiarism of this nature showed a fundamental lack of character. It said they could not admit students who stole other people's personal tragedies for their own gain. It said Kelsey's acceptance was permanently withdrawn, and they were reporting the incident to their network of peer institutions. Kelsey stopped going to the school after that. She stayed home for 3 days. When she came back on Monday, she looked terrible. She had lost weight and her eyes were red. She would not make eye contact with anyone in the hallways. Her friends had heard rumors about what happened. Some of them asked her if it was true. She would not answer. Several of them started avoiding her at lunch and between classes. The third acceptance got rescinded the following week. It was from a competitive university that also reported the plagiarism to the National Association for College Admission Counseling. Eamon explained to me what that meant. He said other schools would be notified if Kelsey tried to apply anywhere else. He said the plagiarism would follow her to any college she tried to attend. He said she would have to disclose it on future applications, and most schools would reject her automatically. Kelsey now had 0 college acceptances and a permanent mark on her record. Diane begged me to write a letter saying I gave Kelsey permission to use the essay. She said it would fix everything and the schools would reconsider. I refused. I told her Kelsey stole my mother's story, and she needed to face the consequences. Diane said I was being heartless. She said family was supposed to forgive each other. I told her Kelsey and I were not family and we never would be. I told Diane that Kelsey and I were not family, and we never would be. She left the room without another word. 3 days passed before I heard anything else about the college situation. I stayed at Haley's house and went to the school and tried to focus on my homework, even though my mind kept wandering back to Kelsey and what was happening with her applications. Summer checked in with me every morning before class and asked how I was holding up. I told her I was okay, but I was not really okay. I felt guilty sometimes, even though I knew I did nothing wrong. On Wednesday afternoon, I got an email from someone named Vanessa Royce. She said she was the director of admissions at Weston, and she wanted to know if I would be willing to do a video interview. She wrote that my essay moved everyone in the office, and they wanted to learn more about me beyond the application. She said she knew the situation with my stepsister was difficult, but they believed my story was authentic and powerful. I read the email 3 times to make sure it was real. Then I called Haley into the guest room and showed her my laptop screen. She screamed and hugged me and said this was exactly what I deserved. I scheduled the interview for Friday afternoon. I spent 2 days preparing even though I already knew what I wanted to say. I practiced in front of Haley's mirror and wrote down notes about my mother and our favorite books, and why Weston meant so much to both of us. When Friday came, I set up my laptop in Haley's room with good lighting and a clean background. Vanessa appeared on the screen right at 3 o'clock. She had gray hair and kind eyes, and she smiled at me like she already knew me. We talked for 40 minutes. I told her about my mother's love for Weston, and how she used to describe the campus in fall when the leaves turned red and gold. I told her about the books we read together when she was too sick to leave the hospital. I told her about writing the essay, and how it helped me process my grief in a way nothing else could. Vanessa listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told me I reminded her why she loved her job. She said reading applications could feel routine sometimes, but my essay reminded her that every application represented a real person, with a real story. She thanked me for sharing my mother's memory with them. After the interview ended, I sat on Haley's bed and cried for the first time in weeks. They were good tears, though. Relief tears. Saturday morning, my father showed up at Haley's house. Her mom answered the door and called up to tell me he wanted to talk. I came downstairs and found him standing in the entryway looking uncomfortable. I told Haley's mom we could talk outside. We sat on the front porch steps and he did not say anything for a long time. Then he started apologizing. He said he was sorry for not protecting me and for letting Diane treat me the way she did. He said he had been so focused on keeping the peace with his new wife that he forgot his first responsibility was to me. He said he should have defended me when Diane screamed about my mother, and he should have made Kelsey face consequences from the beginning. I listened, but I did not say anything yet. He kept talking. He said he knew he failed me and he understood if I was angry. He said he loved me and he wanted to fix things, but he did not know how. I looked at him and felt all the hurt from the past 2 years sitting between us. I told him I needed him to choose me for once. I needed him to stop making excuses for Kelsey and Diane and acknowledge that what happened was theft and betrayal. I told him it was not a family misunderstanding or a mistake. Kelsey stole my mother's story and tried to use it for her own gain. I said if he could not see that, then we had nothing more to talk about. My father started crying. I had not seen him cry since my mother's funeral. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve and promised he would do better. He said he would talk to Diane and make changes at home. He said he wanted me to come back when I was ready. I told him I would come home when Kelsey moved out of our shared room and not before. He nodded and said he would make that happen. I was not sure I believed him yet, but it was something. The following Tuesday, I got another email at the school. This one was from the 4th college that Kelsey applied to. I did not know why they were contacting me until I opened it. They said they received a report from my guidance counselor about plagiarism involving my stepsister's application. They said they were still reviewing applications when Eamon sent his documentation. They decided not to admit Kelsey based on the evidence. They wanted to let me know they took academic integrity seriously, and they appreciated me bringing this to their attention. I forwarded the email to Eamon. He called me to his office during lunch and told me this meant Kelsey now had 0 college acceptances. Every school had either rescinded her admission or rejected her outright. He said the plagiarism flag would follow her to any school she tried to apply to in the future. He asked how I felt about it. I said I did not know. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt sick. That afternoon, Diane showed up at Haley's house. I was doing homework in the guest room when Haley's mom came upstairs and said Diane was at the door asking to speak with me. I went downstairs and Diane was standing on the porch. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and her hair was messy. She asked if I would write a letter saying I gave Kelsey permission to use the essay. She said it would fix everything and the schools would reconsider. I told her no. She started begging. She said Kelsey's future was destroyed, and I was the only one who could save it. She said one letter from me could make all of this go away. I looked at her and felt nothing but anger. I told her Kelsey stole my mother's story and she needed to face what she did. I said I would not lie to protect someone who betrayed me. Diane called me heartless. She said family was supposed to forgive each other. I told her Kelsey was not my family and she never would be. I closed the door and went back upstairs. The next week, Eamon called Kelsey into his office. I knew because I saw her walking toward the guidance suite during study hall. She looked smaller than usual. Later that day, Eamon told me he helped her research community colleges and gap year programs. He said she needed a plan since traditional four-year schools were no longer an option. He said he was professional with her, but firm. He told her this was a consequence of her choices, and she had to rebuild trust through her actions now. I appreciated that he did not let her off easy. March came, and with it, the last round of college decisions. I checked my email every day waiting for news from Weston. On March 23rd, I came home from the school and found a large envelope waiting for me on Haley's kitchen counter. The return address said Weston University. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was my acceptance letter and a thick packet of information about housing and orientation. There was also a handwritten note from Vanessa. She wrote that my essay was one of the most powerful they had read in years. She said they were honored to welcome me to my mother's alma mater. I read the note 5 times. Then I called my father and told him. He cried again and said my mother would be so proud. The next day, I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. I had not been there in months because it hurt too much. I parked and walked to her grave and sat down in the grass. I pulled out the acceptance letter and read it out loud to her. I told her I kept my promise. I told her I stood up for myself and for her memory. I told her I was going to make her proud at Weston. The wind picked up and blew through the trees, and for a moment I felt like she was there with me. I spent the rest of the week in a strange kind of peace. Haley's guest room felt safe in a way my own bedroom hadn't in years. I caught up on homework and helped her mom with dinner and tried not to think about what was happening at home. On Saturday afternoon, Haley knocked on my door and told me to get dressed because we were going out. She drove me to her house where a handful of our friends were waiting in the backyard. They'd hung string lights between the trees and set up a folding table with snacks and a cake that said congratulations in blue frosting. I stood there staring at it all while everyone clapped and cheered. Haley hugged me and whispered that I deserved to celebrate. We spent the afternoon eating cake and talking about college plans and summer jobs. Nobody mentioned Kelsey or the plagiarism or any of the mess I'd been living through. For 3 hours, I just existed as a normal teenager who got into her dream school. I laughed at stupid jokes and took pictures with my friends and felt something unfamiliar spreading through my chest. It took me a while to recognize it as happiness. Real happiness. Not the kind tinged with guilt or grief or worry about what came next. Just pure, simple joy at being surrounded by people who cared about me. When the sun started setting and people began leaving, I helped Haley clean up the backyard. She asked how I was really doing, and I told her the truth. I said this was the first time since my mother died that I felt allowed to be happy. She squeezed my hand and said my mom would want this for me. The next morning, my father texted me asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed and drove to the diner near our house. He was already sitting in a booth when I arrived, looking tired but hopeful. He told me he'd spent the weekend moving Kelsey into the guest room. He'd stripped our old shared bedroom completely, washed all the bedding, vacuumed and dusted every surface. He said my space was ready whenever I wanted to come home. I asked why he was doing this now, and he said because he should have done it months ago. He said he was ashamed it took this long for him to prioritize my comfort over keeping peace with Diane. I told him I'd think about it. He didn't push. We talked for an hour about nothing important. And when I left, I felt like maybe we could find our way back to each other eventually. 3 days later, I packed up my things at Haley's house and thanked her parents for everything. They told me I was welcome back anytime. I drove home with my stomach in knots, not sure what I'd find when I walked through the door. Living at home was exactly as awkward as I expected. Kelsey and I existed in the same house like ghosts passing through walls. We avoided the kitchen at the same time and never made eye contact in the hallway. Diane barely spoke to me beyond basic pleasantries about dinner or the mail. She spent most evenings in her room with the door closed. But my father tried. He started a new routine where we had dinner together, just the two of us, twice a week. He'd pick up takeout from my favorite restaurants and we'd eat in the dining room and talk about school or books or memories of my mother. It was strange and sometimes painful, but it felt like progress. He told me stories about their early years together that I'd never heard before. He showed me old photos from before I was born when they were young and happy and full of plans. Slowly, meal by meal, we started building something that looked like a relationship again. 2 weeks after I moved back home, Summer pulled me aside after class. She told me she'd submitted my essay to a regional writing competition for high school seniors. She said she hoped I didn't mind, but the essay was too good not to share with a wider audience. I didn't know what to say. The idea of more people reading those words about my mother felt exposing, but also validating. Summer said the winners would be announced in May. I tried not to think about it too much. I had enough on my mind with final exams and graduation planning. But when the email came in early May saying I'd won second place and a $1,000 scholarship, I sat at my desk and cried. It wasn't about the money or the recognition. It was about knowing that my writing, my truth, my mother's story had value beyond college applications and plagiarism scandals. It meant something real. The award ceremony was held at the public library on a Wednesday evening. My father came and sat in the front row. Summer was there with several other teachers from the school. Haley showed up with flowers. When they called my name, I walked to the podium and was accepted the certificate and check. The organizer asked if I wanted to say a few words. I hadn't prepared anything, but I took the microphone anyway. I thanked my mother for teaching me to love words and stories. I thanked my English teacher for believing in my voice. I said that writing the truth, even when it's painful, is the most important thing a writer can do. I said that protecting your truth and standing up for yourself matters more than being liked or keeping peace. I didn't mention Kelsey's name or the plagiarism directly, but everyone in that room who knew the story understood exactly what I meant. When I sat down, my father was wiping his eyes and Summer was beaming at me from her seat. The next week, I found out through a mutual friend that Kelsey had enrolled in community college for the fall semester. She'd also gotten a part-time job at a coffee shop downtown. I saw her there once when Haley and I stopped in for drinks. She was behind the counter wearing a green apron and taking orders with a flat expression. She didn't see me or pretended not to. At home, she was sullen and quiet, spending most of her time either at work or in the guest room. But at least she was doing something instead of wallowing in her room feeling sorry for herself. I didn't feel bad for her exactly, but I also didn't feel the burning anger I'd carried for months. She made her choices and now she was living with them. One Saturday morning, Diane knocked on my bedroom door. I almost didn't answer, but something made me open it. She stood in the hallway looking uncomfortable and asked if we could talk. We went downstairs to the living room and sat on opposite ends of the couch. She said she'd been thinking a lot about everything that happened. She said she was wrong to defend Kelsey's actions the way she did. She admitted that what Kelsey did was theft and betrayal, and she shouldn't have tried to minimize it. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I waited for her to apologize for the things she'd said about my mother, but she didn't. She didn't take back calling me heartless or saying my mom would be ashamed of me. This conversation was as close to accountability as I was ever going to get from her, and I knew it. I told her I appreciated her saying that. We sat in silence for another minute before she got up and left the room. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't healing, but it was something. Prom arrived in late May, and I went with a group of friends, including Haley. We rented a limo and took pictures at someone's house and danced until our feet hurt. Kelsey didn't go. Most of her old friend group had moved on without her once the plagiarism story spread through school. She spent prom night working at the coffee shop. When I got home that night and saw the light off in the guest room, I felt a small stab of guilt. But then I reminded myself that consequences are not the same as cruelty. I didn't do this to her. She did this to herself. I got ready for bed and fell asleep in my own room in my own space, feeling lighter than I had in months. The week before graduation, Summer called me to her classroom after the final bell. She handed me a wrapped package and told me to open it. Inside was a leather-bound journal with my mother's favorite quote inscribed on the cover in gold lettering. It was from a Mary Oliver poem my mom used to read to me when I was little. Summer told me to keep writing no matter what happened next. She said my voice mattered and the world needed to hear it. She said she was proud of me not just for my writing, but for standing up for myself when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I hugged her and thanked her for everything she'd done. She'd been more than a teacher. She'd been the adult who saw me and believed me when my own family couldn't. Graduation day came on a sunny Saturday in June. I put on my cap and gown in my bedroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My mother should have been here to see this. She should have been in the audience cheering and taking pictures and crying proud tears. But she wasn't, and she never would be. I had to make peace with that. I walked downstairs and my father was waiting by the door in a suit and tie. He told me I looked beautiful and that my mom would be bursting with pride. We drove to the school together and I lined up with my class in the parking lot. When they called my name, I walked across the stage and was accepted my diploma. The audience clapped and I searched the crowd until I found my father. He was on his feet cheering louder than anyone else in that gym. It had to be enough. It was enough. The week after graduation, Kelsey found me on the back porch. I was reading in the swing where I always sat when I needed space from the house. She stood in the doorway for a minute before asking if she could sit down. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. She sat on the opposite end of the swing and we rocked in silence for a while. Then she started talking. She said she'd been thinking about everything that happened and she needed to tell me something. She said she was sorry for real this time. Not sorry she got caught, but sorry for what she did. She said she understood now what she took from me and why I couldn't let it go. Her voice was quiet and steady, and she looked at me when she talked, instead of staring at her hands like she usually did when she apologized. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I told her I was accepted her apology, but I also told her our relationship would never be what it could have been. She'd broken something between us that couldn't be fixed. She nodded and said she understood. We sat there for another few minutes before she got up and went back inside. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement that we'd both lived through the same awful thing, and now we had to figure out how to move forward. Summer arrived hot and long. I got a job at the library shelving books and working the checkout desk. The work was easy and quiet and gave me time to think about leaving for Weston in August. My father and I started having dinner together twice a week at the diner near his office. Just the two of us without Diane or Kelsey. At first we talked about safe topics like my job and his work and what classes I might take freshman year. But slowly we started talking about harder things. I told him I needed him to understand that supporting me didn't mean abandoning Diane and Kelsey. It just meant not asking me to pretend the betrayal didn't happen. It meant not expecting me to be okay with what Kelsey did just because we lived in the same house. He listened and asked questions and admitted he'd been so focused on keeping everyone happy that he forgot his first job was protecting me. By the end of summer, we were closer than we'd been since before my mom got sick. Not the same as before, but something new that felt solid. Diane made an effort too. She stopped defending Kelsey's actions and started respecting the boundaries I set. She didn't come into my room without knocking anymore. She didn't try to force family dinners or movie nights. She asked before she did my laundry or moved my things. Small gestures that showed she was trying to see me as a separate person, instead of just another daughter she could fold into her family. We'd never be close. I'd never call her mom or confide in her or ask her advice. But we reached an understanding that we could live in the same house without constant fighting. We could pass each other in the hallway and say good morning without tension crackling between us. It was enough. In July, Haley and I took a road trip to visit Weston's campus. We left early on a Saturday morning with snacks and a playlist and 4 hours of highway ahead of us. The drive went fast. We sang along to music and talked about everything and nothing and stopped at a rest area for terrible coffee. When we finally pulled into the campus parking lot, I felt something shift in my chest. The buildings were old brick covered in ivy. The quad was green and dotted with students reading under trees. Everything looked exactly like my mother's photos. We toured the creative writing building first. The classrooms had big windows and wooden desks worn smooth by decades of students. The library smelled like old paper and had reading nooks tucked into corners. Then we found my mother's old dorm. It was locked, but we stood outside looking up at the third-floor window that used to be hers. I felt her presence there stronger than I'd felt it anywhere since she died, like she was standing next to me saying she was proud, saying I'd made it, saying this was where I belonged. Back home, I joined the Weston Facebook group for incoming freshmen. People were posting introductions and looking for roommates. I scrolled through dozens of posts before one caught my attention. A girl named Jude Sanchez from Colorado, who loved books and hiking and wanted a roommate who didn't party every night. I messaged her and we started talking. She was funny and kind and easy to talk to. We video chatted twice and decided to room together. I was cautiously hopeful about having a roommate I could actually trust. Someone who wouldn't go through my things or steal my words or make me feel unsafe in my own space. My father helped me shop for dorm supplies. We went to Target on a weeknight when the store was mostly empty. He pushed the cart while I picked out sheets and towels and a desk lamp. While we shopped, he told me stories about my mother's college years that I'd never heard before. How she was shy her first semester and barely left her room. How she joined the school newspaper and found her people. How she called him every Sunday from the payphone in her dorm hallway. He was trying to connect with me through her memory. Trying to show me he understood why Weston mattered so much. It made us both sad, but in a good way. The kind of sad that comes from remembering someone you loved, instead of trying to forget them. 2 weeks before I left for Weston, Kelsey knocked on my bedroom door. She asked if she could read my essay. The one she stole. The one that destroyed her college plans. I stared at her for a long time trying to figure out what she was really asking. Then I realized she needed to understand exactly what she tried to take. I printed a copy and handed it to her. She sat on my bed and read it while I pretended to pack. When she finished, she looked up with tears on her face. She told me it was beautiful. She said she understood now why I couldn't let it go. She said she was jealous of my relationship with my mother and the way I could put my feelings into words. She said she made a terrible choice because of that jealousy, and she was sorry. I sat down next to her on the bed. I told her I hoped community college went well for her. I told her I hoped she figured out who she was without trying to take things from other people. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, more like acknowledgement that we were both moving forward separately, that her path and my path had split and would probably never cross again in any meaningful way. She nodded and wiped her eyes and left my room. I went back to packing. The night before I left for Weston, my father knocked on my door holding a cardboard box. He said he'd been saving it for the right moment. Inside was a collection of my mother's things from her college years. Her faded Weston sweatshirt that still smelled faintly like her perfume. Her favorite books with notes in the margins written in her careful handwriting. Photos of her on campus looking young and happy and full of possibility. A journal where she'd written about her classes and her friends and her dreams for the future. I held each item carefully like they might break. My father sat next to me on the floor and we looked through everything together. He told me my mother would be so proud of who I'd become. Proud that I stood up for myself when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Proud that I was going to Weston to follow the path she'd walked. I believed him. I folded my mother's faded Weston sweatshirt and placed it carefully in my suitcase between 2 sweaters. The fabric still held the faint smell of her perfume even after all these years. My father stood in the doorway of my room watching me pack. He cleared his throat and I looked up at him. He told me he wanted me to call him every week. I promised I would. He crossed the room and pulled me into a tight hug. His voice cracked when he said my mother would be so proud of the person I had become. He said she would be proud of the way I stood up for myself when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I hugged him back and felt tears on my face. We stood there for a long time holding on to each other. When we finally let go, I finished packing while he carried boxes down to the car. The drive to Weston took 4 hours through farmland and small towns. My father drove and I sat in the passenger seat with the box of my mother's college things on my lap. He put on a playlist of her favorite music without asking if I wanted it. Songs from the 80s and 90s filled the car. We sang along to the ones we both knew. Between songs, my father told me stories about calling my mother at her dorm from payphones. He told me about visiting her on campus and meeting her roommates. He told me about the weekend she took him to her favorite coffee shop, and they stayed up all night talking about their future. It felt like she was in the car with us, like she was part of this moment even though she had been gone for years. I watched the landscape change outside my window and felt ready for what came next. My dorm room was on the 3rd floor with big windows that looked out over the quad. The space was small but bright with afternoon sunlight. My father helped me carry my boxes upstairs. We were arranging my books on the shelf when I heard voices in the hallway. A girl with dark curly hair appeared in the doorway pulling a rolling suitcase. She smiled and introduced herself as Jude. I recognized her immediately from our video chats. We hugged like we had known each other for years instead of just a few weeks. My father shook her hand and then excused himself to give us space. Jude and I spent the next 2 hours decorating our room together. She hung string lights above her bed while I put up photos of my mother. We talked about our class schedules and made plans to explore campus before orientation started. By the time my father came back to say goodbye, I felt like I had found someone I could trust. That night after my father left, I walked across campus alone. The sun was setting and the old brick buildings glowed orange in the fading light. I followed the paths between academic halls and dormitories. I walked past the library where my mother used to study. I found the bench outside the English building where she told my father she loved him for the first time. I sat down on that bench and looked up at the windows. Somewhere in this place, my mother had discovered who she was and what she wanted from life. I felt her pride in me like a physical presence. I felt her joy that I had made it here after everything that happened with Kelsey. I knew that by fighting for my essay and refusing to let someone steal my story, I had honored her memory in the way that mattered most. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I had earned every step of this journey through months of grief and revision, and standing up for myself when it would have been easier to stay silent. This was my mother's dream for me, and now it was my reality. I sat on that bench until the stars came out and felt completely at peace.